Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
If, like me, you subscribe to the desperately unfashionable school of thought that suggests we should look for good in all people, even politicians, regardless of their political hue, then there'd be a degree of sadness regarding the resignation of Amber Rudd, but only a degree. She did appear to be, at least during the Brexit campaign, on the side of the sane and the decent. But, of course, this embrace of Theresa May's hostile environment policies leaves very dark shadows hanging over her political reputation, at least for those of us who believe in humanity and decency and don't consider callousness and sociopathic tendencies to be admirable. But why has she gone over sins of omission and commission that could all reasonably be laid at the feet of Theresa May? A very good morning to you. It's hard to know where to start today. I was tempted to start with Jeremy Hunt describing his devastation at the resignation of Amber Rudd, but I didn't have time to trawl through his every utterance over the last 2 weeks to see what noun he used to describe his feelings with regard to the British citizens who've been persecuted and terrorised by the government that he's part of. He says, we're devastated. People are devastated at Amber Rudd's resignation. Colleagues are devastated. Imagine being devastated at a colleague's reservation but having next to nothing to say about the prospect of innocent British citizens being incarcerated as a direct result of policies enacted by that colleague. As I said, it's hard to know where to start today. It's one of those mornings where every angle. So I've got a little frog in my throat at 5 minutes after 10, as you can probably already tell. What a great start to the week. It's my fault for rocking it out at the O2 on Saturday night. But here's the thing. Amber Rudd has gone partly because 6 months was spent ignoring mounting evidence of a very serious scandal regarding the so-called Windrush generation. Forgive me, I'll be all right in a second. 6 minutes after 10, let's start again. Amber Rudd has gone because, well, she presided over the persecution, I would use the word terrorising, of British citizens in order to just pretend that the problem wasn't happening. There you go. You don't have to have read every single article that Amelia Gentleman has written in The Guardian in the last 6 months to realise that any claims that they didn't realise this was systemic and huge are at best ignorant and at worst downright dishonest. Then you have the denial that there were any targets. Yvette Cooper opened up that particular oyster, not knowing then how valuable the pearl within would prove to be. Yvette Cooper at select committee stage asked that question about targets. Amber Rudd replied that there weren't any. Then she was told that civil servants had said that there were, and she tried to finagle, if that's the right word, a sort of blurring of what targets actually meant. And that assumed, I think, weapons-grade status early yesterday, when her defenders rolled out for the usual television programme, started trying to conflate or separate ambition from target. So Brandon Lewis, I think, was the one who was arguing that, yes, she had an ambition to increase removals to 10%, but it wasn't a target. And I think they would have got away with that if then this final letter hadn't been leaked, in which Theresa May was told by Amber Rudd that really there is a target, it is 10%, and this is what we're going to do to hit it. So, genuinely, and I know this is becoming a little bit boring actually, well, it is for me at least, when I sit here and describe the facts of the story to you and then express utter befuddlement and bafflement that the response couldn't have been more robust. I suggested to you in the middle of last week that the definition of democratic decline would be a government minister facing no consequences whatsoever for presiding over the persecution of a wholly innocent British citizen. But that I'm afraid, that Rubicon was passed. That was done. They were going to get away with it. They were going to walk away scot-free after presiding over policies which saw innocent British people persecuted, incarcerated. People lost their jobs, they lost their health care. And it's people like you and me. I know that there are a small number of people who find it impossible to conceive of people with a different skin colour being like them. But we are, just trust me, we are all the same. And if a government can treat those citizens with such callous disregard, it can treat any citizens with such callous disregard. But they got away with that. They got away with it. There was clearly, by the end of last week, an answer to my question. Will they face any consequences? And that answer was no. Yvette Cooper's Select Committee question began the ball rolling, but even that ball looked to have stopped when Brandon Lewis yesterday morning was allowed by the usual suspects in my profession to perpetrate the astonishing fraud upon the British public that there's somehow a substantive difference between an ambition that people have pledged to achieve and a target. That's how mad things have become. I guess because of Brexit, in which the country was invited to choose its own reality, regardless of evidence, the whole of this political landscape has become slightly surreal. It's almost as if we now afford equal weight to every opinion under the sun. What do you think? Oh, I think the Earth's flat. Oh, really? Okay, well, that's a valid position. And now we'll talk to someone who thinks the Earth is round. It seems that what Brandon Lewis did yesterday morning was just offer up an alternative reality in which ambitions and targets are profoundly different things. But she'd got away with it. Until the civil servants that she very, very unwisely tried to blame for her own failings last week exacted their revenge, as they are wont to do, and released a letter that she sent to Theresa May. Now, I'm told by people who are closer to the Westminster machine than I will ever be that there's great anger in senior Conservative ranks over the leak. There's talk of perhaps launching an inquiry to find out where it came from, which suggests that they have learnt precisely nothing. They're not interested in the culpability, the responsibility, the accountability, and the relationship between action and consequence. They're interested only in who blew the whistle on them. In other words, they are not embarrassed by the offences committed by this Prime Minister and this ex-Home Secretary. They are embarrassed only by the exposure of these offences. So where are we? Where are you? Because here's the thing I don't get. Why has Amber Rudd resigned over issues caused, created and wholly known to Theresa May? It's not individual ministerial responsibility. She's been busted in a lie, but the lie was only busted because of the contents of a letter that she sent to Theresa May, which meant that every syllable Theresa May uttered in defence of Amber Rudd's self-defence was bogus. Just think about this, because there are, and I'm sure there have been, I can't remember any at the moment, but there must have been times when I've laid out the cards in this way, which increasing number of people are beginning to suggest very few other places in the British media actually lay out the cards face up. They're usually face down. So I lay out the cards in this way. I describe to you the, to me, unavoidable reality, the inevitable conclusion, the nudity, if you will, of the emperor. And then you point out to me that actually, no, it's not that simple. So how else can you account for what has happened over the course of the last week? How else can a Prime Minister who, as Home Secretary, brought in hostile environment policies and an obsession with immigration targets still be in her job after her successor in the Home Office essentially presided over what she inherited and ended up in hot water? And if your answer to that question is, well, she misled the House, and this is the really grim truth here, she hasn't gone because of what she did to men and women who have lived here for 4, 5, 6 decades in peaceful, law-abiding, tax-paying harmony, but ended up being locked up, thrown out of their jobs, facing eviction from their homes, losing health care, which they expected to be provided by a system into which they'd paid for decades. She hasn't resigned because of what happened to them. Don't make that mistake. She has resigned solely and exclusively because she got busted completely lying to the House of Commons. And the evidence of that lie was a letter she sent to the Prime Minister. So the idea that the Prime Minister could not be party to or conscious of the fact that Amber Rudd was lying, every time Amber Rudd or Brandon Lewis said there's no target, Theresa May knew that she had a letter in her in tray contradicting precisely what her senior politicians spent the whole weekend saying. Think about this for a minute. They were all lining up over the weekend on social media to stick up for Amber Rudd. The Goves, the Hunts, the Javids, the Liddingtons, the Gokes, all the usual suspects, ploughing into social media, sticking up. I think even Boris Johnson had something to say. Although, of course, this being Boris Johnson, 24 hours later, he could quite easily have said the polar opposite. So they all went out to bat for Rudd, right? But Theresa May had a letter on her desk that made a nonsense of the defence her senior cabinet ministers were mounting on behalf of her Home Secretary. Have I got that right? 0345 6060973. The only thing that did for Rudd in the end was the existence of a letter that proved that she was lying, or at the very least demonstrating weapons-grade incompetence when she claimed that there weren't any targets for removals. The letter that proved her to be misleading the public and the House was addressed to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister presumably sanctioned the campaigns of defence that we saw this weekend before they all fell apart at 5 minutes after 10 last night, knowing that she'd received a letter from Amber Rudd in which incontrovertible evidence was provided that there were targets and they were working to reach them. So this should be one of those mornings where you can leave your party politics at the door. Obviously, we don't live in a country where that's possible anymore. There'll be some people using this as an opportunity to continue bullying Diane Abbott, who, for the record, seems increasingly unfit for office, but more, I would say, the slowness of her voice, the ponderousness of her delivery. I don't think she's very well. I think Jeremy Corbyn displays blind loyalty to his senior lieutenants, those who've been alongside him for 30 or 40 years. And don't forget, Abbott and Corbyn both voted against the bill that led to the hostile environment. But she sounds to me to be vulnerable. Do you know she gets more abuse, racist and sexist abuse, than pretty much the rest of the House of the Commons put together? So much so they have to deliver it in a sack to the police every week. They can't even do it on a daily basis. So you'll allow me this morning not to join in the bullying of the shadow Home Secretary. We'll focus instead on the disgraced ex-Home Secretary and the disgraceful previous Home Secretary who remains Prime Minister. And you can tell me right now how the hell Theresa May still has a job when every single thing that Amber Rudd has resigned over was either conceived by or known to Theresa May. I've got one answer to that question. Well, there's two, obviously. You have the complete corruption in the heart of the Conservative government. But I'm not going to go down that road because I'm going to try not to be party political. Here's why Theresa May is there. Because of Brexit. Everybody fears her replacement would be worse than her. You've got people who still cling to the hope that she might be able to drag some sort of sanity out of the fire of furious xenophobia and ignorance that we're now seeing licking up to the very doors of the Citadel. But they'd worry that she could be replaced by a Johnson or a Gove or you know, a complete charlatan. And then, of course, on the other side, your hardcore Brexiters are worried that she might be replaced by someone with a little bit more courage, integrity and honesty who will stand up and say to the country, look, this is going to be horrible and this is going to be ugly, but we've got to admit that we've done something horribly wrong. And that is the only reason I can see why she's still in her job. And what a mockery that makes of our country. 17 minutes after 10. Let's get the phone lines open. That's more than enough from me. I think the frog in my throat has migrated, so that's a relief at least. 0345 6060 973. Simple question, but I wonder whether there's a simple answer. Why do you think Theresa May is still in a job when every single thing that Amber Rudd has resigned over was either conceived by or known to Theresa May? And if I've got that wrong, we need to get that up first and early. If I'm looking at the facts and jumping to a conclusion that you think is false, you think there is some substantive difference between what Theresa May did and knew and what Amber Rudd did and knew, then we need to get that up early because we'll need to ask another question. Sajid Javid, I can tell you, is the new Home Secretary, the first ethnic minority member of Parliament, I think, to hold one of the great offices of state. I think I've got that right. I'll tell you something that worries me about that, though. He was supposed to be in charge of Grenfell, Sajid Javid, under the auspices of his last appointment. And Grenfell is not being very well managed. 2/3 of the families rendered homeless by that tragedy remain without a permanent home. There's no controversy here unless you subscribe to the hate-mongering news sites that masquerade as media in this country. The reason why people haven't accepted offers of permanent homes is because they want to stay near their friends, their families, their schools and their communities. It's very straightforward if you're minded to understand it. Sajid Javid was in charge of making sure that went smoothly, and now he's been taken off it, which is a bit of a kick in the teeth to some of the people in this country who've suffered unimaginable pain and horror over the last 12 months. But he is the new Home Secretary. We'll talk to Theo Usherwood shortly about what that may or may not mean. We will continue for the time being, however, to talk about May and this very simple question that I don't think any supporter of this government could in all conscience answer. Amber Rudd has resigned over issues that were entirely caused by or known to Theresa May. The letter that has done for Amber Rudd was sent to the Prime Minister. The contents of that letter gave the lie to Amber Rudd's claims about immigration, about targets and about removals. So whenever Amber Rudd was telling that lie, whether to the House, whether to a select committee or whether to her friends in the media, Theresa May knew it wasn't true. Now, you do not have to be Jeremy Corbyn's biggest fan to recognise a fundamental problem in our government. If a cabinet minister resigns because of evidence contained in a letter sent to a prime minister, then the prime minister is party to that deception, complicit in that con, guilty of the same offence. And when you add to that, I think, inalienable truth, when you add to that the fact that the policies Theresa May introduced as Home Secretary, the environment she sought to create for people, directly caused Amber Rudd's problems, I see genuinely Theresa May as more culpable than Amber Rudd. So why has the latter gone and not the former? Mark's in Loughborough. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi. Well, I think just in response to your first question about how would I explain it to an intelligent 12-year-old,
yes.
I actually had this conversation with my very intelligent, just 13-year-old yesterday.
That'll do. That's as near as damn it. You know, we're not going to split hairs over that.
Well, I can't tell you what she thinks about Theresa May because it's actually unbroadcastable.
Gosh, I'll wash her mouth out with carbolic soap. Go on.
I know. But she did say that she was glad that when she grows up and when she's old enough that she's going to be living in a country where it won't matter what the colour of your skin is, what sexuality you are, what gender you are, that what's going on now.
I've got a horrible feeling I felt like that when I was 13, but let's hope she's right on this occasion. So give me the explanation of why Theresa May can create and know about every single thing that Amber Rudd has resigned over, but keep her job.
Well, I think you're bang on, but I think there's actually an even bigger point, is that there's no way that Amber Rudd would have written that letter to Theresa May about targets if it wasn't in response to something she's been specifically asked to do.
Yes.
That would have come up at Cabinet.
You're absolutely right. You wouldn't just drop it in there, would you, willy-nilly? Oh, I think I'll drop her a line about targets and immigration.
It would have been, how are you continuing the policy I initiated?
Yeah.
I put that stuff on the side of vans. You know, that's the climate that she's, that she's created. I think Stuart Lee was bang on in The Guardian about this yesterday, that he was saying that, Observer, yeah, sorry. I continue. The two are continuous in my mind, but
yes, of course.
that he was saying that basically that they tacked to the right in order to kill UKIP, and this is the result. There's
no mystery, is there?
That they've created.
It's pandering to racism. The Daily Mail creates a usually exaggerated, embellished, or downright invented narrative of hatred, narrative of anti-immigration callousness. Weak politicians try to address issues that don't really exist, and then when reality bites, everything falls apart. But why is Theresa May still in her post then?
Well, I think your point is right that, and Yvette Cooper was on this yesterday as well, that she's all the alternatives are worse.
I've enjoyed your call, Mark. For the record, I don't really need people to ring in and tell me what other columnists and commentators are saying. This is a platform for people who don't have the privilege of newspaper columns to share their thoughts, but you are, of course, as you have done, right to pay credit to people who are particularly good at it, and few are better than Stuart Lee. 26 minutes after 10. Theo Usherwood is outside Downing Street. Sajid Javid, Theo, I told you to put a few quid on Karen Bradley about half an hour ago. I hope you didn't take my advice. And there goes the phone line. 26 minutes after 10. Mark is in Hitchin. Mark, how come Theresa May gets to keep her job when Amber Rudd has had to resign over things that either were done by or known to Theresa May?
The reason she's still in her job is because what they're fearing is if she is then lost, then we'll have a general election, and their biggest fear is Jeremy Corbyn getting in. And quite frankly, that's a bit of a affront to democracy, because if they believe the country wants Jeremy Corbyn, well, let us get on with it then, because they've shown how totally incompetent they are. They've shown how they've taken hostile environments not only into the to do with migrants, but they've now taken it into the benefit systems. I mean, you basically now have to prove you're innocent in this country before you go anywhere else. But what really concerns me was what you mentioned about that letter yesterday, James, the one that got released.
Yes.
Because in that letter, Amber Rudd goes on to say, I need to basically release beds so I can put people in them because I'm upping my target.
Yes.
And then she goes on to say, and this is the bit that really worries me, and I know that some immigration lawyers have been shocked to see it in the letter, is that where beds, and I quote, where beds are being blocked by illegal immigrants that we have no realistic hope of removing from this country, they then talk about putting them out in the community. Well, hang on. How can they be illegal immigrants if we have no chance of removing them from the country? Because we'd have to take them to court to say they were unlawful. So that sounds to me as if they have already defined people as being illegal when the courts haven't.
I don't like illegal. Can we say, I know we'll be a very lonely corner, but I just prefer undocumented. There's no such thing as an illegal person. There's no such, and then it becomes a noun. Even the BBC today were talking about illegals. These are humans.
Oh no, I absolutely agree with you, James. But what my point is...
No, I understand your point. I'm just enforcing the vocabulary of this programme. We say undocumented on this programme.
I mean, I don't agree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, we should not be holding people in detention.
No, I agree. But this is the point, isn't it? This is what will be missed. This is what they will be allowed to ride roughshod over, is not just the knowledge, but the complicity of Theresa May in everything that Amber Rudd has done and fallen on her sword for. I don't know that there's a great terror of Jeremy Corbyn taking over any more than there would be with any other Labour leader. They want to hang on to power. The Conservative Party historically is better than the Labour Party at prioritising the pursuit of power over almost anything else. And they'd be a lot more spooked if a Labour leader had the 20-point lead in the polls that frankly they should have. But the retention of Theresa May, I think, hinges upon the failure of the cabinet to want to get rid of her, and the reason why they don't want to get rid of her has more to do with Brexit than it has to do with Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, absolutely. I mean, what we have a weak Prime Minister. We're basically, her ministers are getting away with absolute murder, to be quite honest. You know,
they are, aren't they?
I think. Well, they are getting away with murder because they're basically briefing against each other. They're doing what they like. I think Amber Rudd obviously got herself, as you quite rightly put, into a position where she couldn't defend it anymore. But she should have gone a week ago when we first heard that a British citizen had been harmed in some way, be it they had lost their livelihood, be it they had no medical care. Yeah. She should have gone.
Well, they were locked up in Yarl's Wood. They were driven to Heathrow Airport. No evidence yet of actual deportations, but frankly that's an exercise in hair splitting. We spoke to a young man that was leaving under his own wind rather than actually await the removal by the immigration officers, but we know that completely innocent people were denied cancer treatment, were locked up in Yarl's Wood, were dismissed from their jobs because their employers were worried about being hit with a fine, and that was what Theresa May has done to our country, and we are now divided. It's why the first caller's daughter, dreaming of a slightly more harmonious future, is absolutely right. We're divided down the middle in this country between people who can see a fellow citizen be treated like a terrorist by this government and not care because they're black and you're not. That's it. I'm sorry. It may seem simplistic, it may seem unkind, but that is it now. And the cabinet is full of people, regardless of the fact that she's just appointed a ethnic minority Home Secretary. The cabinet is essentially populated by people who look at the Windrush scandal and don't see it as an offence against them personally because, well, you know, oh boy, it couldn't happen to us, could it? Just take this on board briefly. Home Office sources have told The Guardian that immigration enforcement has been working all year to reach the target of 12,800 enforced returns in 2017-18. They have been bracing themselves to acknowledge to ministers that the agency has failed to do so. In other words, Theresa May's administration is an administration that the civil service has to brace itself to tell that they've only managed to undertake about 225 enforced deportations a week as opposed to the 250 targeted. We've now had a week of Amber Rudd claiming there weren't any targets, and when the proof emerged that she set the targets herself, the proof was contained within a letter that she sent to the Prime Minister, who was sitting on her hands and staying silent every time Amber Rudd claimed that there weren't any target. Democracy is absolutely diminished at the moment in this country. And I almost envy the power of the blinkers that you would need to wear not to see this as a systemic national issue rather than a party political one. If you can sit there today and feel that because you're a loyal Conservative you're not going to get upset or outraged by this, I almost envy you. But I don't envy you. Theo Usherwood has hopefully found a phone box down in Westminster and can talk to us now about the appointment of Sajid Javid as the new Home Secretary. Let me remind you what Sajid Javid said yesterday, Theo, if I may. I've worked with Amber Rudd for many years, long admired her hard work, integrity and courage. Absolutely the right person to run the Home Office.
He also said, James, that of course it could have been his parents who could have been caught up in the Windrush scandal. Of course, they're from Pakistan, and he said that it was something he couldn't stand by. He's taken over from Communities and Housing, where he was Secretary of State, big promotion. In terms of the dynamics when it comes to Brexit, and that's really important in any reshuffle nowadays, he was a Remainer, close ally of the former Chancellor George Osborne, but like many ministers that might frustrate you, James, personally, they have a slightly Damascene conversion. Only last week he was tweeting about the customs union being a comfort blanket for many Remainers who wanted to stay in it. So he bridges both sides of the aisle, so to speak, when it comes to leave and remain, and therefore for Theresa May, who doesn't want to cause consternation on either sides within her own party, he fits the bill in that regard as well. And of course, James Brokenshire, a comeback for him. He had to take a short leave of absence for health reasons. He had suspected lung cancer, needed an operation. That was cleared up. He's actually been back in the House of Commons quite a lot recently, following a very speedy recovery, and he takes over at Communities and Housing from Mr. Javid, and he of course had been tipped for the Home Office job, but he had previously been in that department. So probably the thinking was that keep him away from it, so that there's not the contagion isn't allowed to, what did you know when you were in the department sort of thing. You end up with questions like that.
It rather undermines the government's claim that they cared deeply about the plight of the people affected by the Grenfell Tower tragedy, doesn't it? Because Sajid Javid was in charge of that brief, and now it's going to get passed to someone else.
Absolutely, there's that continuity aspect. That if you give somebody a brief, you give them a problem or something to solve, and of course it's less than a year since the tragedy at Grenfell, and they're suddenly whips it away from them to give it to somebody else, and they have to pick up the file and deal with it. But Theresa May didn't have a huge number of options when it came to taking this post. The Home Office is a very, very difficult department to manage.
You didn't put any money on Karen Bradley like I told you to just before we came on air, did you, Theo?
No, I didn't.
Oh, thank goodness for that, because I wasn't going to pay you back.
Karen Bradley is seen as the protégé to Theresa May, but not the most, how shall I put it, she's not regarded by backbenchers as perhaps the most consummate media performer, and it would have been a high-risk strategy. It's a really difficult department to manage, and Sajid Javid is seen as, with his background in banking, as being a very capable pair of hands. You need to micromanage the Home Office, in other words, and Amber Rudd, ultimately, her undoing was that she wasn't across the detail.
Well, she wasn't across the detail. That's a generous analysis of it, because the letter that finally did for her leaves Theresa May complicit in the deceptions regarding targets? Every single time Amber Rudd or someone speaking on her behalf defended her claim that she didn't know about targets or that she hadn't set targets or that there weren't targets, Theresa May had a letter in her filing cabinet that proved Amber Rudd to be telling porkies.
Yes, it's who's caught out in these situations. It's who's caught out telling the porkies. So Amber Rudd's undoing was that she went in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee. Yvette Cooper immediately zeroed in on whether there were targets. Amber Rudd misled, as she said, that committee by saying there weren't any targets. You then had this drip, drip, drip. Firstly, well, there were targets. Then it was a question of, well, I wasn't aware of the targets. And then you have this letter which came out yesterday afternoon saying that she was aware because she'd written to the Prime Minister.
She set them herself and was asking for an apple off teacher for working so hard to achieve them. So why does that not lead to Theresa May's door?
Well, it does lead to Theresa May's door.
You know what I mean. Why are people still not calling for her?
It does lead to Theresa May's door, but Theresa May hasn't misled anybody. I mean, OK, you could take... I'm talking about this... I'm playing devil's advocate with you, James. I'm talking about this in general terms.
No, I know.
If Theresa May had been asked that question by Jeremy Corbyn at Prime Minister's Questions, were there targets, then people might think more highly of Jeremy Corbyn's performance at Prime Minister's Questions rather than talking about the one question that Yvette Cooper asked and managed to get, ultimately, the resignation of a Cabinet Minister. But Jeremy Corbyn had 6 questions at Prime Minister's Questions, didn't he?
Yes.
And he didn't ask that question.
No, well, but the letter hadn't come out then. That's what I'm interested in.
No, but the letter hadn't come out when Yvette Cooper asked the first question.
No, I know, but Amber Rudd has resigned because of the contents of the letter, and the letter was sent to Theresa May. So Theresa May is fully cognizant, entirely aware of the evidence that should have done for Amber Rudd. So every single time anybody from her government spoke in defence of Amber Rudd, Theresa May knew they were lying. She had it in a letter.
Yeah, I think, sorry, we're talking about roundabout each other. I was sort of trying to make the point that if Jeremy Corbyn had asked a very simple question, were there targets at last week's Prime Minister's Questions, instead of worrying about the pool clip that, the clip that will go up on social media, and actually ask a really pertinent question, Theresa May would have been forced to give an answer. Now, she may have not been as sensible as Amber Rudd to do something off the hoof and try and get around an uncomfortable question by telling a mistruth, but
She'd have been held to the flames. And finally, then, will they be? Is she home and dry now, Theresa May? This Amber Rudd takes the bullet. Everything moves along, and the fact that Theresa May both created and was complicit in every single thing that's caused Amber Rudd to resign gets glossed over because, Brexit.
Form book would say yes.
Theo Ashwood, great stuff. 10:43 is the time. Sajid Javid is the new Home Secretary. Theresa May is still Prime Minister. Amber Rudd has resigned because of things that Theresa May did and or knew about. Just make sense of that too. An intelligent 12-year-old is the example that I'm using this morning. Explain to an intelligent 12-year-old how the bricklayer can get fired for the sins of the architect. Philip is in Guildford. I quite like that. Did you write that down, Philip? How can you fire the bricklayer for the sins of the architect?
I liked it.
Go on.
James, come. I think you're being obtuse. It's obvious why Theresa May is clear, home and dry on this one, because she didn't get the letter.
She didn't read the letter. This the Amber Rudd defence.
The letter.
Yes.
It was her heartless PPS. She gets so much correspondence across her desk. She can't possibly be expected to open every letter. Her hapless PPS got it, didn't pass it up the chain. He's going to get the bullet. And I can't
laugh at this. Because for people who perhaps are lucky enough not to be obsessed by political detail won't realise that Philip has essentially just reprised Amber Rudd's own defence for not having seen a letter telling her that there were targets. Oh, I didn't see it. So not even Brexit Britain would allow a Conservative cabinet minister to claim that they could write a letter without realising it. You couldn't. I mean, she can't get. I wrote the letter, but I didn't read it. We haven't reached that stage yet, but we are now. Yeah.
We must have. We can't be far from it.
No, I think that's next week. I wrote that letter, but I didn't read it.
And the hapless PPS will be in the cabinet after he gets sacked. Will be in the cabinet in 3 months' time. And in one bound, the Prime Minister was free.
250 people a week being removed from this country is something that you never, ever, ever see reported on the front pages that have created precisely the toxic environment that Theresa May legislated for and that Amber Rudd has fallen on her sword for. Can we be serious for a moment, or are we so far down the rabbit hole now that all we can do is point at the absurdity, the hypocrisy and the corruption and just sort of roll our eyes in the hope that it will be over one day?
James, can I say something
Anything,
else?
yeah.
if you don't mind, one thing that stuck in my mind, and it was this whole Windrush thing, was the parallel with a few weeks ago. We were listening on the radio to some really strong, tough Aussie on the radio, breaking down in tears when he learned that their venerated cricket team had roughed up the ball in order to swing the game their way, and he said, "This just isn't cricket," and he broke down. It so disgusted the nation that it was so shameful, so shaming that nothing could come close to it. And that is how the whole country feels, I think, about Windrush.
Not the whole country, my friend.
Well, an awful lot of people.
More than perhaps they realised, but not as much as you and I would like to believe.
Doesn't it just offend against anybody's concept of fair play?
Mate, we've got people in this country who unveiled that Breaking Point poster hours before Joe Cox got murdered. Don't talk to me about fair play.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
And walk off now.
Those were fonder days. Warmer day. Great work, Philip. And that's the question. How come the bricklayer gets the bullet and the architect stays in the job? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:46. And do not think, I'll say this and I'll say it again, that Amber Rudd has resigned because of what she did to the Windrush generation, the people who lost their jobs, who lost their healthcare, who lost their homes, who lost their security, who lost their very freedom in some cases, despite being as innocent as the day is long, despite being citizens of equal status to you and to me and to my mum and to your mum. She did not resign because of what she did to them. Because of what she did to them under Theresa May's auspices. She resigned because she got caught lying. The proof that she lied was contained in a letter that she sent to the Prime Minister. So I don't think anyone, and I would bite your arm off if you rang in, can portray this as anything other than incontrovertible evidence that there is something deeply, deeply rotten in the state of Britain. Struggling with the state of modern British politics. Nothing new there. But wondering how a Prime Minister can remain in the job when a Home Secretary has resigned over things that the Prime Minister either enacted or knew about. I'd have to double check. I've told you a few times recently that I have a small number of Twitter correspondents who act as sort of de facto researchers on the programme now, such is the nature of the programme that we've managed to build together over the years. This is the Inspector's report to the Home Office in 2014, okay? And this is verbatim from that report. Records... the Capita's instructions were to update the removal screen on CID for departures that occurred within the same removals year ending 31st of March as the triage took place and where the migrant was an immigration offender. The removals screen entries were counted towards the Home Office removals target, word for word, from a report submitted to the Home Office in 2014 by... it's a government paper. I've got the link here. So, Theresa May, thank you to Katie for this. Theresa May was Home Secretary. Rudd was touring the studios, supported by a significant swathe of the Cabinet, claiming not to know that there had been targets and apologising profusely for being unaware of that. During Theresa May's tenure as Home Secretary, phrases like this were commonplace, or at least unremarked, in official government literature. The removal screen entries were counted towards the Home Office removals target. Theresa May didn't just know there were targets, she actively introduced them. And yet Amber Rudd has had to resign for fibbing about their existence and then being caught telling the Prime Minister she was trying to meet them. Man, it's so nuts at the moment because I don't like hyperbole. Theoretically, hyperbole should be a great friend of the phone-in host, the sort of gob on a stick. But actually, we live in such bizarre times politically that hyperbole is unnecessary. I'm frightened of hyperbole because every time I think this is really, really serious, and you can't not discuss this without referencing Brexit. Hyperbole surrounding Brexit now doesn't seem misplaced. The levels of ignorance still being displayed by David Davis and Liam Fox are now beyond my comprehension. We've moved into the realms of psychodrama rather than political analysis. But this looks to me to be absolutely rancid. This simple element of evidence. Why has Amber Rudd had to resign? Well, there's a letter that proves she's been lying for a week. Who did she send the letter to? The Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister knew she was lying for a week, yes. Unless she didn't read the letter. Well, no one's going to offer up that defence. Honestly, the British public aren't there. Well, Amber Rudd offered up that defence 3 days ago. And most of the British media let her get away with it, which is why her own civil servants went back to the filing cabinet and pulled out even more proof that she was talking through her hat, and in so doing proved that the Prime Minister knew all along. This is how bad things have become in Britain. I think, journalistically, there's a real difficulty for a lot of people in this profession to believe that things are quite as bad as they really are, or indeed to believe that people are quite as bad as they really are, because your average senior journalist will, they'll be sitting next to Theresa May at dinners, or they'll have been to university with cabinet ministers, or they'll know some of these politicians personally. They'll call them friends. They'll socialise together. Labour or Conservative, doesn't matter, but I'm talking about the government at the moment, so I'm talking about Conservatives. They come into the studio and they tell barefaced lies. And it doesn't quite occur to the journalist doing the interview that this is a barefaced lie. It's possible the politician doesn't know that it's a barefaced lie. They're just too dumb to realise that what they're saying isn't true. But when you come up against this kind of story, you really have to wonder whether we are now the kind of country that 20 years ago we would have laughed at for its diminished democracy. Prime Minister got the letter that the Home Secretary sent. Home Secretary has had to resign because of the contents of that letter. So unless Theresa May is going to do an Amber Rudd and claim she got the letter but didn't read it, even though it was addressed personally to her and focused on one of her most cherished policy platforms, we're just going to let this pass? Oh, yeah, of course we are. Daily Mail's in charge, not Theresa May. And the Daily Mail, of course, more responsible than any other institution in this country for creating precisely the sort of toxic environment regarding immigration that Theresa May felt she had to address, despite it being largely embellished, exaggerated or invented. So if you've got a newspaper environment telling punters every day that there's a dragon round the corner about to come over the hill, and unless we slay that dragon, we're all doomed, what do you as a politician do in the knowledge that there aren't any dragons? You either announce policies designed to slay dragons, which you do so dishonestly, or you take on the people, like the Daily Mail, telling the public that there are dragons everywhere. There be dragons. She hasn't got the guts to do that. So where do you end up? You end up with policies designed to slay dragons that don't exist. The problem is Amber Rudd was the one in charge when it became clear that they were going after completely innocent people because they couldn't find any dragons or enough dragons. Paul's in East Dulwich. Paul, what an absolute mess. Can you provide a slightly more positive analysis?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Paul.
I'm not 100% sure if I can directly answer that question, but
don't worry.
I can certainly lean towards the build-up to why we're where we are at. The last time I spoke to you, the only time I've spoken to you, was when you asked the question a few months ago. I don't know exactly how the question went, but it was to do with, are we being too scathing of Theresa May?
Yeah, I've retreated from that position.
I know you have, and
fairly quickly.
You have, and I remember that the day you were, your radio broadcast on that day.
Yes.
But if I can just refer us back to,
of course,
the Lancaster House speech.
Yes.
Now, just before that, when Theresa May stepped up on the podium when she took the job as Prime Minister, I heard her rhetoric, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. She does seem very warm towards British people, and she does genuinely want a better way forward for the UK.
Yes.
Then I heard the Lancaster House.
This is the contradiction between the speech she made about the just about managings and about young black people facing the legal penalties on a scale and in a way that young white people never would, about the lack of opportunity and equality. And you set that against the Lancaster House speech, which was red meat for the Ian Duncan Smith kind of Jacob Rees-Mogg corner of the party. And, well, it's Jekyll and Hyde.
Oh, absolutely. And the key word here is contradiction, and this is the story of this whole government. And there is one key sentence that she used, or phrase, however you want to term it, which was citizens of nowhere.
Yeah.
That has stuck with me, and even though I can't sort of directly associate it with the thinking of Enoch Powell in that 68 speech, that so-called Rivers of Blood speech. It did have that kind of leaning towards this new-found attitude towards where we are at now. And in a sentence, I can only put that down to the fact that I have now come to the conclusion that Theresa May is definitely a populist prime minister, just leaning towards what she believes is the public's attitude towards.
And she's not. It's not the public's. It's not the public's attitude. It's the imaginings. It's the fetid imagination of one or two newspaper editors and newspaper owners that she sees, and it does frame the public's attitude. But I don't think immigration is in the top two issues for the council elections that are upcoming, because we haven't been embarked upon the kind of toxic rabble-rousing that we saw in the run-up to Brexit. It's actually really upsetting. I get cross a lot, but today I'm just sad.
Yeah, me too.
This is our country. This is our country, and they're turning it into a horrible place. A really horrible, corrupt, dishonest place.
I absolutely agree. And again, I think all I can add to what you've just said is I just think it's her and her total kind of like blinkered ambition to come what may, to do anything, to go for the lowest common denominator.
Just to genuinely help people, to spend money and energy genuinely helping people that need help. But I don't think she sees people from the West Indies as full humans in the sense that you and me might be, and the evidence of that does perhaps lie in that description of the citizens of nowhere. I think that was the work of the same aide who came up with the hostile environment. You know what it's like at the moment, don't you, if you are unimpressed by the entire political establishment. And also, I mean, I appreciate that some of the people that I'm about to describe listen to this programme, for which obviously I'm very grateful. But it's not really their natural home. People who just sort of pick up on a ludicrous slogan and keep repeating it despite the fact that all of the evidence is that they're wrong. Someone's described me as hard left this morning, which is quite remarkable, to be honest with you. So that's what I mean by the tribalism. I'm increasingly optimistic, actually, that a significant swathe of the country is resisting the footballification of British politics. And today's one of those days where the dangers, the profound dangers of excessive partisanship become clear. If I have anything like a theory in working at the moment, if I have anything like a first principle for getting the country back to standards of civilization and sanity, then it would be, as I just began to work out with you last week, it would be the idea that the same rules have to apply in the same way to all people. So, I mean, the American example is the worst on this. The idea that it's okay for Donald Trump to do all manner of disgusting things, but that somehow Hillary Clinton is an equal and opposite offender because of an email server. Do you see what I mean? And you've seen it a bit with the White House dinner over the weekend, where a comedian poked fun at Donald Trump's spokeswoman. And all of these people who get their knickers in a twist about so-called freedom of speech when they are demanding the right to be racist or Islamophobic without challenge are silent about the idea that a comedian shouldn't be able to make jokes about a White House spokeswoman's eyeshadow. Do you see what I mean? And maybe it was always like this, and I just didn't realise until things got so ugly. But I would like Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May to be held to the same account. You know, I would like Diane Abbott and Amber Rudd to be treated in the same way by the British media and the British public. They're categorically not. Today is one of the days where that becomes really dangerous, because who can look at what has happened and think that Theresa May should still be Prime Minister? Answer, and I say this really cautiously, nobody honest. I don't see how you can be honest and look at what's happened over the weekend and believe. I suppose there is one way in which you could, and that would be that you don't believe Amber Rudd should have resigned either, and you can use that as a platform from which to leap into the conclusion that Theresa May should still be Prime Minister. That's an angle I hadn't considered before. If I've just described you, you know the number. Oh, well, if you don't, I should tell you. How rude. 0345 6060 973. But how could anybody honest think that Amber Rudd's resignation over the contents of a letter that she sent to Theresa May doesn't leave Theresa May at least as culpable and at least as responsible as the woman who sent the letter? How can the recipient of a letter that gives the lie to a week of government claims be somehow less responsible or less culpable than the sender of a letter? 03456060973 is the number to call. And it's a hobby horse of mine, but my hobby horses at the moment have a horrible habit of turning into thoroughbreds as the months pass. My hobby horse here is that simple test. Would you treat all politicians in this way? Imagine how many resignations or dismissals have there been? I'm always a little bit wary of doing this because there are very strict rules regarding the run-up to council elections. But I can tell you that there's a hell of a lot of candidates losing their positions as a result of things that have been found on social media. And to the best of my knowledge, none of them are Labour, standing accused of anti-Semitism. Front page of the Sunday Times yesterday tried to bring the Russian bot story to Jeremy Corbyn's yard. I mean, that was almost beyond belief. But there you go. And, of course, anyone who's followed this story properly, as you have, because you're kind enough to listen to this programme, will know that the social media campaigning undertaken by so-called Russian bots is not designed to deliver a desired or a desirable conclusion for Vladimir Putin. It's just designed to do precisely what I've just described. Remove consistency, create confusion, sow instability. It's not. He doesn't care who's in Downing Street or the White House, as long as a significant swathe of both countries believe that the person in the White House is evil and the person who lost is evil as well. It's all about division and dissent. You know this. I mean, you've known this for years, since the first time we interviewed Bill Browder on the programme. So that's where we are. And I have to keep chipping away at this until something cracks, because I don't understand how the evidence that left Amber Rudd with no choice to resign was a letter sent to the Prime Minister. I haven't quite got the sentence right yet, have I? I like the line about the bricklayer falling on a sword for the sins of the architect, but that's not quite right. It's too analogous. This is about evidence. Why has Amber Rudd resigned? Well, this letter came to light, which meant that everything she'd said for the last week wasn't true. Oh, crikey, who did she send it to? Her boss. What, so her boss knew that everything she'd said for the last week wasn't true? She could claim she didn't read the letter. No one's going to think the British public are that stupid. Well, Amber Rudd did last week, and with the help of the Tory-supporting newspapers, she got away with it. She got away with the defence that, yes, I did receive a letter telling me that targets exist. So when I claimed that there weren't any targets, I wasn't actually lying. I just hadn't read the letter that told me targets exist. So what's today's letter? Well, today's letter is a letter about targets that Amber Rudd actually wrote. Crikey, who did she send it to? Theresa May. So Theresa May's sitting in the House of Commons hearing reports, or she's sitting at home watching the telly, and she's seeing Amber Rudd deny that she knew targets existed, but she knows she's got a letter in her own back pocket in which Amber Rudd talks about targets and how hard she's working to meet them. But no one's asking for Theresa May to account for herself. 11:11. Alan is in Gloucester. Alan, what's going on?
Hi there, James.
Hello, Alan.
I'm a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party.
Okay.
And since this has started, I've been furious. I reckon that Amber Rudd is just a foot soldier.
Yes.
And now Mrs May should fall on a sword. She's the architect of it.
Since when have you been furious? When did your fury ignite, if I can ask that?
Well, when all this came up about sending people home,
yes, so that simple thing, that simple fact that regardless of how many people turn out to have been or not to have been forcibly removed while innocent, we know that they lost their jobs, we know they were denied healthcare, we know that they lost their homes, and in some cases they lost their freedom. They were actually locked up, they were completely innocent, and you sat there like I did, although I'm not a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party, you sat there like I did and felt that this is so fundamentally wrong, we need to see consequences.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I'm in a city where there's between 3,000 and 3,500 West Indian descendants.
Yes.
I work with people from the West Indies, and I could not believe what I was hearing, and I must admit, I listened to you the other week, and I had tears in my eyes and a lump in my throat, and when somebody had cancer and her son was being deported the next day, I was furious.
Yes.
And I am considering whether or not to leave the Conservative Party, and whether or not the next general election I'm going to vote for them.
Yeah, well, where would you go, though? And we better not talk about voting intentions, although you were specific about the general election. But I can tell you from the other side that homelessness is not a comfortable place, my friend.
It's awful. I mean, I couldn't imagine what they're going through when you know, when you're ill, you can't use the health service. You can't pay your mortgage. You're going to get kicked out your own house. You've got to go and live with relatives. You never know there's going to be a knock on the door. I mean, it's not the British way of doing things. And it's not the right thing to do.
Do you? And you don't have to answer this because it's not what you rang in to talk about. But the notion of empathy, you find it clearly very easy to empathise with people suffering the plight you describe. Your empathy presumably is built at least in part on imagining how you would feel if it happened to you. I wonder whether you would go as far as I go when I say that there's something wrong with the empathy of Theresa May, because she doesn't seem to think that this could ever happen to someone like her. So the sympathies that you've just expressed for your friends and colleagues don't reach her heart because, well, no, it's never going to happen to people like me.
Mm. Well, I totally agree.
Do you really?
Rotten to the core.
Yeah.
I think Mrs May and Amber Rudd, the way that they could have done what they've done, they're done it rotten to the core. They're not the type of people that I want to represent me or represent my country. I reckon she should go now. I'm really annoyed about it. It doesn't matter whether you're a Conservative or...
But then who could replace it? Then the problem becomes, we might be leaping out the frying pan into the fire. There are people in the Cabinet who've said things about foreigners in the past that make Theresa May look like Martin Luther King.
There's better people than Amber Rudd and Mrs May. Maybe we need a new generation of people like over in France where they've got Macron. We need to get rid of the older people that have got them views and bring people in that are decent.
I can't argue with any of that, Alan. Thank you for the call. And I'm sorry that you had tears in your eyes when we were discussing or talking directly to the mother and son who found themselves in the eye of this particular storm, but that's the way it goes. 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. It's 11:15. I want to take a couple more calls on this, but I guess you can read into it what you will. Nobody can defend Theresa May at the moment. We've been here for an hour and a quarter. Admittedly, I had a frog in my throat for the first 10 minutes and we took a little bit of a detour to chat to Theo. But how can Theresa May be in her job when the reason why Amber Rudd had to leave hers was the contents of a letter that Theresa May has in her pocket? That's the thing here. The more you chip, the closer you get to the seam, to the lodestone. That's the lodestone here. How can that letter be enough for Amber Rudd to resign on dishonesty grounds, not on shame, not out of a sense of lingering guilt at what that department has done to the people that we just heard about, that we just talked about? She's gone because the letter proved her deceit. But Theresa May had the letter in her pocket all along, which means she knew about the deceit. Thank you, James, for reminding us that Amber Rudd spent a week denying the existence of targets for enforced deportations, which she had set herself and then boasted about in a letter to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister kept quiet when Rudd repeated her denials at the Home Affairs Select Committee and subsequently. And I wonder if you can explain that to me in a way that doesn't make us look like a tin pot country. Because the evidence that rendered Amber Rudd's position untenable was contained within a letter that she sent to the Prime Minister, which means every single utterance made by Amber Rudd or other cabinet ministers in defence of her professed ignorance was a deceit, a deception, and Theresa May knew. And I'll tell you what makes me despair about the state of the nation. Who is going to go? I'm not going to be allowed near them ever, but who is going to go after Theresa May on this? Where does the accountability come in? You think it's a coincidence that her Director of Communications is a former political editor of the Daily Mail? You think it's a coincidence that that's her chief spokesman, I beg your pardon, her Director of Communications is a former producer of BBC politics programmes? You don't hire men like that unless you're trying to shape the news agenda. You simply don't. The qualifications that you have for a job like that are solely your ability to manipulate and shape the news agenda, because the news agenda is being pursued and set by your former colleagues. The man who actually wrote the article that appeared under the headline "Enemies of the People" now sits next to Theresa May in Downing Street advising her on how to secure positive media coverage. So where the hell is the journalist that's going to be able to get close enough to the Prime Minister to ask her why she kept the contents of that letter secret, despite knowing that they would render the Home Secretary a proven liar? And why don't you care more? 0345 6060 973. Dean's in Abingdon. Dean, what do you think?
Hello, James. Good morning to you.
Hello.
Well, this morning, I take my granddaughter to school every morning. And she was sat at the breakfast table this morning and said to me...
The Brexit table? Crikey, mate, that was a Freudian slip.
Was it the Brexit table?
Go on.
Yeah, and she said to me, 10 years old this is...
Yes.
And she said, why are we brought up to tell the truth and people in government don't tell the truth? I said, what do you mean? So she said, well, it's pretty clear to me that Theresa May is in charge of the country, so she should have known what was going on. And I said, well, she probably did know what was going on. She said, so she's not telling the truth then.
What did you say to her?
And I said, well, in a way she's not telling the truth. But politicians make up their own rules, basically, once they're in power. And she said, well, that's not right, isn't it? They should be fair to all the country. And why are they sending these people home when they've lived here all their lives? And I said, well, where did this come from, Sophie? She said, well, my friend, Alicia, her grandfather is being threatened with, is it deportation or something like that, she said.
Oh, Lord.
I said, well, yeah, it is. She said, but he's lived here all his life. And he's worked here all his life, and now he's threatened with deportation unless he gets the right papers. So I said, well, where does this come from? She said, oh, Alicia's ever so upset.
Right, then make sure Alicia knows that her granddad only has to ring the new hotline at the Home Office and theoretically things will be sorted out, because I don't want her lying awake in night worrying about her granddad. Do you know, Lenny Henry made a joke about this at Stephen Lawrence's memorial service last week when he just said, my daughter's... And Theresa May was sitting yards from him. And he said, my daughter's at home really worried. She's searching for my passport. And Lenny Henry's joking. He's got a flipping knighthood. They'd struggle to deport him. But then he said a comment about documents. He said, have you got documents? He was addressing the congregation. Have you got the right documentation to prove that you've been here for each of the last 4 decades? And he turned and he looked her in the eye and he said, have you?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly the point. And I said to my granddaughter, well, you know, there are things afoot where her grandfather can apply to get the right paperwork. Good. Well, it's important that they know that. I remember after the referendum result came in, and an Italian classmate of one of my daughters was asking whether or not they were going to have to go back to Italy, a country in which she's never actually lived. But you know what they say about citizens of the world, don't you, Dean? Yeah, absolutely. My point, James, is if 10-year-olds are talking about this, you know, then something is fundamentally wrong with this country.
It feels that way increasingly, and it doesn't have to be this way either. I mean, you know, economics come and go. These variables that affect all of our lives in myriad different ways are inevitable, but this is all chosen. This is all specifically chosen by politicians. This is not the ebb and flow of international financial markets. This isn't the result of a refugee crisis or something over which we had no control. These are deliberate policies enacted by the woman currently in Downing Street, which the woman who was in the Home Office until 10 o'clock last night has resigned over. Dean, I don't know, maybe talk about Taylor Swift tomorrow over the Brexit table, try and lighten the mood slightly. It's 25, or indeed the Vamps. I must say happy birthday to my good friend James McVeigh, the guitarist in the Vamps, who gave me a gift on Saturday night that I could live until the age of 100, and I don't know if anyone will ever make me feel that magical again. Imagine being, I'll tell you what, Dean, you'll like this. Imagine taking Sophie to a concert, mate, yeah?
Yeah.
At the O2, rammed to the rafters, and you're sitting there with your 10-year-old daughter or your 10-year-old granddaughter, and a bloke comes to the front of the stage, announces the next song, and then dedicates it to you by name in front of your little girl. How big would you feel?
Oh, wonderful that is.
It was just one of the best things that has ever happened to me, and I express my gratitude here, not for the first time. 25 minutes after 11. Let's go to Philip, who's in Manchester. Philip, what's going on?
Hi, James. How are you?
Cheer up, Phil.
Where would I start? I mean, say what surprises me. After you're talking about people who are in charge of newspapers, work for the press, who then end up working for the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister and whatever. Yeah. It goes back to Alistair Campbell. You talk about how can these people end up being in positions of authority, even though they're not elected politicians, which they're not. And look what he did with Tony Blair. And now you've got various people working in 10 Downing Street who are quite willing to go on TV, defend the Prime Minister. I mean, I watch...
Well, I'm not. I was thinking more about the behind-the-scenes manipulations of the media, which Alistair Campbell certainly could stand accused of. Not the people who are being wheeled out publicly to do the spinning and the fibbing on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Yeah, she's still there, but did you really expect Amber Rudd was going to resign last night? I was waiting for her to appear in Parliament today.
I thought that. I tell you what. I mean, if we were weather vanes, I'd be having the hinges oiled, because I just don't know for sure anymore, and that's kind of emblematic of what we're discussing. But I did think, and I did tweet that letter was very important. That seemed to me to change everything, and I wasn't shocked. I sort of saw the news on Twitter just before I went to bed.
Don't assume even Mrs May is bulletproof, because it isn't over yet.
You reckon?
No.
But who's going to lead the line on that then?
Well,
if they've got the proof that she knew Amber Rudd was fibbing, because Amber Rudd wrote to her in direct contradiction of what she's been saying publicly. Has anyone called? Where's Jeremy Corbyn today? Does anyone know?
Well, I was just going to mention Corbyn. He doesn't take responsibility for anti-Semitism in his party. 2 years have gone since the Chakrabarti report. He meets groups from the Jewish community last week. They're not happy with him, and he doesn't kick Livingston out of the party. That's going to come up sometime this month.
I thought he'd gone. Hasn't he gone, Livingston?
He's suspended officially until May. I think it's May. Personally, I mean, I've got to put my cards on the table. For years, I was a dyed-in-the-wool Labour supporter. I was so pleased when Tony Blair got elected after years and years of Tory government, but Iraq just blew it for me. And all the lies from Campbell, and I just feel sick when I see Campbell on TV now going on about, he wasn't responsible for this, and Blair did this, and I saw the interview he did with Blair about a year ago.
Well, if you read both of their memoirs, I'm not here to shill for Alistair Campbell. I like the guy. I find his honesty about mental health and issues like that to be incredibly...
Vows, the biography of Blair, which is superb because it details all the inner workings of the cabinet.
It does, but actually I think the responsibility for sexing up the dossier lies almost exclusively with Tony Blair and possibly with John Scarlett. Campbell, you can accuse him of many, many things, and I wouldn't argue with you, but on that one, actually, that probably isn't... His name isn't the one that should be on the tip of your tongue.
Sorry to interrupt. Scarlett seemed to change his tone, because if you look at various books about it, he said that the intelligence wasn't... I think the word was reliable.
Originally he did, and then he was sent away and he came back, and that had nothing to do with Alistair Campbell. But we digress. I also feel, and I don't know whether you'd agree with that, on a day, I mean, what you said about Jeremy Corbyn is all solid. What you said about Alistair Campbell, possibly less so. But we shouldn't really be talking about that today, should we?
Alistair Campbell, really. Sorry.
We shouldn't be talking about that today.
Yeah, but you're bringing up the issue of sort of figures in the press who...
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, no, okay.
It happens with every government.
It does. No one's pretending otherwise. And does Jeremy Corbyn? No, of course he doesn't. You've already covered that. It's funny, isn't it? Philip, former dyed-in-the-wool Labour supporter, Alan earlier in Gloucester, a card-carrying... Was it Alan? Anyway, a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party, all sounding very similar now. So either you are still wearing your blinkers, you're still waving your rattle, you've still got your scarf on and you're cheering for the Reds or the Blues, or you're sensible, honest and sane.
How you doing, radio star?